You're listening to the Overfunctioning Leadership Podcast, learning leadership concepts through life experience. Hello and welcome, friends, to another podcast brought to you by Of Leadership. I am Alex.
I'm John.
And I'm Zach.
And we have here with us
Sean Christie.
John. Who is Sean?
Sean Christie is an author and a speaker who does a number of different things regarding social media and helps businesses with their marketing plans, specifically as it relates to social media. So we're excited to have Sean with us this evening.
Indeed. Before we get to Sean, we're going to be talking about finding your why, kind of like a Simon Sinek. Lots of people talked about finding your why, and so we're going to explore the little pathways for all of that. But before we do any of that, last podcast we talked about extraordinary relationships or extraordinary relationships, just a little bit more than the ordinary into the extra world. So, and that was a lot of Roberta Gilbert's work, which talked about what?
We had equal, open, and honest.
Equal, open, and separate.
Separate. Yeah. I always forget because I just focus so much on honesty, but
which is part of openness.
It is.
Yeah, it's kind of my why too. You know, why not be honest? But I equal, opposite, honest, open. We talk about these three words. Introduced by Roberta Gilbert.
Sure.
And she basically said, "Hey, like those relationships that are pretty great in your life, they're equal, they're separate, and they're open."
You did it.
I did it in probably the wrong order.
Order. That's okay.
But yeah.
It works.
Yeah. So check that podcast out sometime.
And Roberta Gilbert's book called Extraordinary Relationships.
Yep.
It's a cheap book, quick read, and would be really helpful.
Applies to more than just leadership.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, well, that's just going to lead us down this path now into Fable time. So go ahead. It's chilly out there. Get on your long johns but not John. It was very confusing. Sorry about that. John, you're just staring at me.
Right. No, I'm just listening.
Anyway, Sean is going to actually open up with his fable, talking a lot about where he's come from and his why a little bit. So, Sean, take it away, sir.
Thanks, guys, for having me on the podcast. I appreciate being here tonight. You know, it's funny. I think we're all trying to figure out our why, and I feel like we all want to have that why sooner than later. But it didn't happen for me until probably almost 9 years ago. So if you haven't found your why, don't worry. That time is coming. You just have to be patient and all in good time. But it really started when we got a prenatal diagnosis for our son Beckett. And my wife was about 6 months pregnant, and a doctor had said, they called us and they said, "We found some abnormalities in the last ultrasound. Could you come in? We want to talk about it." So we went in and they gave us a long list of things that it could potentially be. And one of those things was Down syndrome, which he was born with. But it ended up being one of the greatest blessings in our lives. But I can remember the day that we came home with that news and they confirmed it with a test. I can remember being very upset. I had set up Beckett's room in Team USA Wrestling, and I called him the chosen one and had his wrestling singlets ready to go, because in our family, everybody wrestles. That's just what the boys do. When I got that news, it kind of shattered me a little bit, because everything that I thought was going to happen for him suddenly disappeared with one diagnosis, with one conversation, and I had to kind of reimagine what the future would look like. And I remember having this conversation with God and kind of being mad and angry. Why me? Why would you do this? And went to bed and woke up the next day and had a crazy amount of peace internally. And I told my wife, this is going to be the most, the greatest thing that's ever happened to us. And she looked at me and she's like, "You're still in shock. You're crazy." And I was like, I don't know why I feel this way, but I just know this is going to be awesome. Fast forward 3 more months, and he was born. He had some significant health challenges. And my wife had just graduated with her undergraduate, and I had just graduated with my master's. And he had some significant health problems when he was born, so he was going to have to stay in the hospital for several weeks. And I can remember her coming to me and being upset in tears. I don't want to leave him here in the hospital. I can't leave him on his mom. And I said, well, we'll figure it out. Just tell work you're not coming back, because she had run out of FMLA, and we'll figure it out. So she quit her job, and we're sitting in the hospital, and I believe it was a Sunday night, and I put this post out, and during my master's was 2007 to 2009, my students that I managed in the Department of Student Life at the University of Akron told me that I needed to be on Facebook. And like everybody, when Facebook first came out, what is this Facebook? Mm-hmm. So I got involved in it, and just a great way to connect with friends. And I put this post out there, hey, Beckett was born. He's got some health challenges. He'll be okay long-term. Would appreciate your prayers. And we're doing this fundraiser for him. And it was essentially crowdfunding before crowdfunding was a thing. Overnight, we raised over $5,000, and I was totally floored. I had never raised more than $500 ever in my entire life. And for me to be in a hospital, not talking to anybody, and to be able to do that with 30 seconds of work, I really felt like there was something to that. And so I ended up quitting my marketing job and starting what became the first social media company in the state of Ohio. And really, Beckett was my driving why. I wanted to be a voice for the voiceless. I wanted to talk about disability and Down syndrome, and instead of focusing on the things that they couldn't do, focus on the things that they could do, because our doctor, when he gave us the diagnosis, suggested that we terminate the pregnancy, which obviously kind of put us in a bad spot. And then our first couple doctor's appointments, they shared with us all the things that he wouldn't do. He had low muscle tone. He wasn't going to develop like all the other kids. He wasn't going to be as big or as strong. And those are not things that you want to hear as a parent. And so we chose instead to focus on, okay, maybe he's not going to do some of those things, but what could he do? Because every one of us is not made out to be a fantastic athlete or an incredible scholar, and we all have unique gifts. And so how can we take Beckett's gift and share with the world that this is a really incredible thing? And I had the blessing of marketing and being a voice for the voiceless, and using social media as a tool to start having those conversations and showcasing the amazing things that could be done instead of telling people what couldn't happen. And so that was a kind of a cool beginning to my company.
Awesome. Yeah, there's a lot of interesting, great things in there. And so as far as finding your why, so just kind of like recap where we were at. So your son, Beckett, the diagnosis, and then feeling peace about that, and then through Providence led you down a lane of posting something on Facebook, which is new to you and pretty new overall.
New. Yeah,
and
pretty
then
new overall.
That spilling into a way to giving a voice to people.
Advocating.
Yeah, advocating for people. So maybe explain that a little bit. So what do you do now with your social media? Like how does that all work?
Well, it's funny, about I would say a third of my clients are actually nonprofits. I help them tell their story. I help them find new volunteers, board members, and I help them raise more money through the tools of social media. But when I first started, nobody thought that there was a viable business option or opportunity there. So I started working with nonprofits and volunteering my time to show them what it could do. And then as I started to gain traction and help these folks sell out their events or raise more money, businesses started taking notice, because nobody was really doing it from a business perspective. If you weren't Coke, Pepsi, Frito-Lay, those types of companies, Ford, small businesses weren't paying attention to it because they didn't have the bandwidth, the people to do it, and they didn't have the know-how, and they still thought it was more something for college kids to do. So now I work with businesses, nonprofits, and individuals to help them achieve their business or philanthropic goals through the channels of social media.
Gotcha. So you talked about story. Story is one of my favorite things to talk about because it's always just so good. And I know that Zach and I have done some Zammers, and when we do our videos or movies, reviews, we end up talking about story a lot. And so why do you think story is so important? Like what is that?
Well, I think part of it helps somebody that doesn't have a clue what's happening insert themselves into your own shoes. And so if somebody can see what life as Beckett is actually like, then they can either get an appreciation for it or get a passion for it and then come behind us and help support us. But they have to understand what it is. When you say Down syndrome, people may have not experienced a conversation or an interaction with the person with Down syndrome. I had never met a person with Down syndrome or had a conversation with a person with Down syndrome. So when I got a diagnosis, it was a word, and it was a scary word because I didn't understand it. And so through the storytelling and seeing, people and the things that they can achieve, people are driving, going to college, getting married, owning businesses. When I started to meet some of these very special people, it really opened my eyes what the possibilities were. And so I think stories, me telling it from a personal perspective and putting it out there through social media helps engage people. And now they're willing to ask questions, as maybe before, if they just ignored it, then they didn't have to understand it. But now, because their friend is kind of immersed in this culture and in this community, they feel like they're a part of it too, just by being a friend. And it helps them get engaged and understand better. And then they can help tell that story to other people. We have people that reach out to us all the time. Hey, my sister just got a prenatal diagnosis. Would you talk to her? If I wasn't telling the story on social media and I wasn't so proud of everything that our family's doing and going through, good and bad, then we would be robbing people of the same opportunities that we're having. So we use it, and we're very public about the wins and the opportunities of our situation through kind of the day-to-day storytelling of our lives, what's going on in our family.
And you wouldn't have people coming to you and ask them to talk to their wives after that sort of situation if your why wasn't so clear, because you've come out of this with this is my why to some degree is I want to be the voice for the voiceless. I want to show what they can do. And that why is like desirable. I'm not going to go to I'm not going to go to the doctor and desire for him to tell my wife all of the limitations that my child has and none of the ways in which they can live life to the fullest.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And then so where do you think when it comes to leadership and stories, like where is that connection, do you think, when it comes to why is that story piece so important when it comes to being a good leader?
Well, I think the core of all of that is belief. You have to believe your position. You have to believe that it's the right position, because if you didn't believe that was the case, you wouldn't openly broadcast things. And I think when you believe in what you're doing, you're very positive and you can help other people follow, because people are unsure. We're all unsure at some point. And I think just being positive, having a belief and saying, hey, this isn't perfect. There's certainly some challenges here, but the amazing things far outweigh those challenges, and who doesn't have a challenge? And when you can help people find a common ground, whether it's, we're typical versus somebody that might have different challenges than us, we all have challenges. And so we can all kind of rally behind that. And I think there's a vulnerability aspect to that, that I think is really important, because when I talk about some of the ways that I'm vulnerable, people open up and they'll say, hey, I had that problem too, or you know what, I've never experienced that, but here's what I'm going through. Because when I was brought up, from a old school Italian family, there was no crying. Everybody was tough, and that's just not the way that it was. And then this situation helped me understand that there are times that you need to lean on people, and it's okay to be weak, and it's okay not to know. And by understanding all those things through trial and error through this process with our family, I was able to kind of find myself and then be very confident in the way that I projected. And it's rallied a lot of people to the causes that we're involved with, and certainly impacted other families along the way, just like other families impacted us. That's not unique to us. We had people that helped us kind of understand the opportunities too, because we just didn't know what we didn't know. And so we absolutely needed people that could kind of help us guide the way, lead the way.
So we're talking here about developing why. And Sean, what I've heard you talk about is that circumstances helped to develop your why. I'm wondering, just for any of us, how much of circumstances uncover who we truly are versus the circumstances actually shaping and telling us who we are. And I'm wondering, in Sean, in your perspective, or either of you, Zach or Alex, for your own person, of who you are, and for our listeners to think about that, of how do I figure out what I'm about, what I believe? Is it something that's innate and that circumstances reveal that? Or do the circumstances actually shape who I am as a person and then help lead me down the path of what is my why?
So does this go back to our nature versus nurture talk? Which I believe that I won.
Yeah, of course. Of course you won that, and the listeners will only have to go back and
It was
listen.
that side that I won. I don't remember which
Yeah.
side. I mean, yeah. I'm
Yeah.
a winner.
Yeah, you were nature, I believe. And
I don't know. Science related.
Yeah.
So just so I'm clear, so you're talking about like whether it's innate, you're like born with it, or like it's just these circumstances that develop you.
Yeah. So just choices we make in life. How much are they of things that we've decided for ourselves, and how much are they influenced by circumstances and other people?
All right. Well, Zach, you've been a quiet fellow. What do you think?
I mean, let's take Sean's story here. He's a marketer, right? You're a marketer, Sean. So, like, how much of that was shaped by your circumstances? But we know that when you came across your son and his circumstances and that circumstance of your life, that fed into your marketing fed back into that. And so while you wouldn't be the same person you are now without your son, and that's definitely where the circumstances shaped you, your marketing definitely influenced the way in which you responded to that. You are now telling those stories, and I don't think you'd be telling those stories if you weren't in that sort of sphere.
So let's go here. Maybe we're just gonna pick on Sean because he's our guest.
Pick on Sean.
So Sean, pre your son, the circumstances you talked about your family growing up, Italian family, lots of pasta and whatever. I don't know. I can't eat
Marinara.
it. I'm gluten-free. Yes.
Yeah.
So, but within that setup and your family system, I mean, how much do you think that guided your why?
You know, it's funny. I was reading an article by John Angles. Why do we do what we do? Free choices or programmed habits, and he talked about career paths, and he talked about having an aversion to waste and trying to prevent it and reduce it. And the reasons that he did that were because growing up, his family was poor, and so they had to use every last bit of everything that they had to maximize it. And that carried over through life. And career choices, military, multiple generations of people being in the military, that was the expectation. Or I've got a friend, Jeff Sitz, who owns a dry cleaning company. He's a fourth generation family-owned company. The expectation growing up is this is what we do in this family. And I thought, wow, that's not really how it is at all. Your family doesn't impact what you do. You have free choice and you do what you want to do. And I read that article and I tried to disprove that in my own head. And what I found is my dad went into the military. I had two grandfathers in the military. That was not for me. My dad is newly retired, just retired this summer, but was a maintenance mechanic and worked for the same company after he got out of the Air Force until he retired. I think it was like 42 years. But he taught me loyalty. He taught me work ethic. And maybe if my dad would have really pushed and said, hey, I want you to be a mechanic and, work with your hands, maybe I would have done that, but that just wasn't what he wanted for me. He always told me, he's like, I'm working hard so you can do whatever you want to do. I want you to do better than me. I was the first of the grandchildren to graduate from college, and my dad paid every dime. And I was not a good high school student. I'm like, I don't know if this college thing is for me. But when he invested in me and he believed in me, that really pushed me to want more. And there was no way that I was going to let him down, especially after making those kind of sacrifices for our family. And so that's why I chose business. I'm like, I could do something with business. I'm not a math guy. I'm not a science guy. I'm like, well, you know what? Marketing, I like to tell stories. I like people. I like to talk to people. And so I chose marketing. I like to influence people, and I thought that would be something good for me. And so I think that it wasn't necessarily the influence from my dad's career path, but it was his expectation of me to do better. And so certainly family influenced that. And I can also remember him as a kid, and still to this day, our neighbors would come to my dad if they needed anything. He was very mechanically inclined, worked on planes in the Vietnam era. worked on machines for his job, and they would say, "Hey, do you have this tool? Can I borrow it?" Or, "Hey, my car won't start. Can you look at it?" And he would drop whatever he was doing, to my mom's dismay, because she's still waiting on stuff to get fixed in their house. But my dad would always put the neighbors or other people or my sister or I first. And I think that really positioned me to want to leave other people better, because that was what my dad left for me. And so while I didn't recognize it until very late in life, I can see some of those underlying currents were directly given to me from my father, which is kind of neat.
It's interesting that the lessons that you got from your father were always there, but it wasn't until later in life you saw those. Do you think that's something that's just inevitable, that it takes a while for us to really see the big picture? I'm wondering if that's true.
I mean, I would say yes. I guess it's dependent upon who you are. I could see I know myself, even at a younger age, I've always thought too much about things. And so I was able to uncover some things growing up. But I mean, the last 4 years of my life, I've learned more about my backstory than I have in the previous 30. So, so I can definitely see that for sure.
I'm wondering how much of it has to do with focused direction. I was watching a YouTube video the other day, the source of all good information.
Of course.
And it's some method or something. It's like one of the ways that you can accomplish the things you always want to do is take 10 minutes and write down the 25 things that you want to accomplish in life, or whatever that might be, and then rank them, and then only work on the first 5. And so I've been thinking about that, and I think that sort of relates here. When your kid's like, what are you really focused on? You're not really focused on anything. You're doing what's fun. You're doing what's easy. Mm-hmm. You're letting other people lead you often, your parents, your teachers. And so when we have these events that shape us, they're shaping us because they're providing a focal point. They're providing an opportunity for us to say, this is what's important. This is where I'm going to channel my why, and it becomes my why because that's what I'm choosing to live through. And so I think time is integral in that, because the more experiences you accumulate, the more relationships and people who have influenced you, the more opportunities you've had to learn, to grow, and to be guided.
Sure, you have to have those experiences to understand things. Just like I didn't understand what Down syndrome was, now living with it every day and just seeing, exactly what that means to our family. Now I understand it much better. I can speak to it much better. And I think the important point that you brought up is focus. I read something on focus, and it said, just walk down your street, the street you grew up on, that you lived there forever, and just try to notice every detail of your walk. Notice every tree, every leaf. And as you walk down the street, you will find something, even though you lived on that street for 30 years, that you've never noticed before, just because you focused on looking for something new. And I think that's critical.
I am struck by this thought of walking down the street and observing versus walking down the street and being immersed in a smartphone. And I see two parallels. I see young people filled with anxiety, filled with uncertainty and not sure who they are, and this borrowing of self through technology, and how much we miss by not doing a simple exercise like that observing what is versus looking at what other people are doing and consuming that. So creating memories, creating observations through what you talked about, Zach, listing 25 things, focus on the 5. Sean, you talked about the simple exercise of walking down the familiar and stopping and being an observer. And I think those are 2 key ideas to help a person stop and think about who they are and what they believe.
Yeah, and on like taking that a level up, you have discipline in that, in the sense that, I mean, how hard is it to swipe through a feed on your smartphone? You're not gaining anything out of it because there's nothing being put in. And so I think that's an aspect, is like we're talking about this sharp focus to some degree. But the reason one common thread is emotion that we're seeing tied into this. Those whys that we have, the things that end up guiding us, our convictions, all that. When we talk a lot about dealing with emotion, are you operating on an emotional level, or are you operating on a rational level? And so that emotionality can become the focus. Like, that's why those events are shaping us, is because under that duress, we end up acting, sometimes for better, sometimes for worse, but it ends up being that magnifier, that focal point, right?
Is it a higher, I feel like it's a higher amount of emotion at the point in time. Like, it's almost like an acute anxiety. Like, I have to deal with this big situation now in some ways. And that's changed, that's different for everybody. And maybe it's, instead of, okay, I have this high amount of emotion right now for whatever reason, whatever's happened, I need to make a decision about it. Whether you make that decision or not about it can shape a lot of different things about you. So I wonder if it's like thinking, okay, this is happening now. And you explained this a little bit in your story. And even, I've felt this in my life where, okay, I got to do something about this now. And it means I actually have to think about this. Like, I just can't sit with this emotion. And maybe it's just like a guy thing too. I don't know. Like, we just go like straight to the logical, but like,
Our demographics are not.
yes, I am sorry, ladies, but although, I've known a lot of women who have a very logical brain too. Obviously you do. And so, like, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying maybe that's part of it. You get to a point where you're like, I actually have to think about this. I just can't.
I mean, it's that side of the coin where you're saying, like, this is going on, this is happening, and you actually just can't sit down with a smartphone and scroll through it. It's acute, it's not chronic. You can't push it to the side to some degree and ignore it and let the effects of that. You're sitting down and you're like, I have to deal with this. I either have to focus to push it into that chronic sphere, or I have to do something about it. I have to react or respond.
Sean, you have several children, is that correct?
I have 6.
6 kids. Where does Beckett fall in terms of oldest and youngest? He's in the middle. So there's 3 older, or?
Yep, 3 older and then 2 younger.
Okay.
All girls.
Okay, all girls. Wow, interesting.
Yeah, sandwiched in between all girls.
So Beckett has been a different challenge for you, correct, as parents?
Sure. Yeah, he has unique needs, therapies, and different things that we have to do for him that we don't do for the other kids. And I'm sure that takes their toll. It takes its toll on the other kids because all the time spent, et cetera.
Yeah. So I'm just thinking about, you mentioned John Ingalls and the article that you had read, and I remember reading an article that John Ingalls wrote about leadership, and that one of the characteristics to developing good leadership is exposing yourself to different types of people and different types of situations. And he was talking particularly about cross-cultural study and immersion and so on and so forth. But this notion of seeing the world through the eyes of someone different and how that actually opens up your experiences. And I'm wondering if Beckett and having Down syndrome, if that caused you and Katie to step back and look at things a bit differently than you would maybe not have otherwise. And then from there, the connections that you've made. I'm going back to your story, your fable, where you said at first it was a challenge and these were plans that went awry, the wrestling themed room, and then it took you time, and you mentioned that you prayed and then peace came. And then once that came, you were able to see it. So this difference was a challenge, but allow you to experience people and situations in ways that you would not have otherwise. I'm not sure how you see it, but that was what I heard from you.
Yeah, I think that's definitely the case. And I think one of the coolest revelations that came from that is that even bad things or things that you perceive as bad things are actually blessings. And that put me in a place to where no matter what's going on in my life, no matter what kind of adversity that I'm facing, I know that that's just part of the deal. And there's a friend of mine that says, the country has an expectation that we should have no pain. And he says that America has a pain problem. And I find that to be true. And we bury that problem with drugs and alcohol and different things, and sometimes even suicide. And he said it's because we have a fake expectation that life isn't hard. that we should have everything that we want. And what I learned is through this exercise and just kind of going through what we've gone through with our son is that life is hard. That's just the deal. And there's no challenge. My challenge isn't bigger than any of your challenges. It's just different. Just like Beckett's challenges are different than other kids. You know, he's not going to probably have to deal with the heroin epidemic. You know, those are just challenges he's not going to have. But his challenge might be his speech. He, you know, is really struggling with that right now. And so it doesn't mean that anyone's more difficult, but it's just different. And so that really made me say, hey, you know, here's our situation. You know, how are we going to deal with this in a positive manner and achieve the best outcome that we can achieve together with what we have? And I think that's really what leadership is, whether you're an organization or a family or an individual. You're dealt a hand. How are you going to play it? And how are you going to use your resources to get to where you want to go?
So do you think that there are certain individuals who will handle different situations better than others?
I think it's situational.
Yeah.
I really think it just depends on the situation. Like if, you know, you're Indiana Jones in a pit of snakes and you're scared of snakes, you're going to have a real problem dealing with that situation. But if you're, you know, accustomed to that, then you're not going to have a problem. So it really depends on what you're thrust into, your experience level with that situation, and then, you know, how you handle that moving forward. So I think the answer is it depends.
So would you say, did the things that your father taught you, did that help you prepare for Beckett in some ways?
So absolutely. So one of the things that we haven't talked about is my sister was born with some significant health challenges. She had a heart issue called tetralogy of Fallot, and a term that was used for that in that time, and I don't know if it's still used, is blue baby. She was born blue, and she needed to have major heart surgeries just to live. And so my dad knew all about that, and I know he tells stories, and I still see him in his garage. He would collect Coke and Pepsi bottles and take them back for recycling to get the extras that he needed because my sister's medical bills were so high growing up. So again, you know, being selfless, everything went to the family, and then like the extras that he wanted to have, he would use, you know, recycle things for to get what he wanted. So I think that he did prepare me for that. And again, I didn't know.
Yeah.
But with, you know, my sister having all of her challenges and the family focusing on her, I was no stranger to the hospital and what that looked like. And, you know, understanding that you needed to chip in, and, you know, not that my sister is, you know, so much different, but she did have different challenges, and I needed to stick up for her and defend her, although we would fight at home all the time. But in the public, you know, it was always, you know, to take care of my sister no matter what. And then we'll probably argue at home in private.
Yeah. So the overall question that we're trying to answer here is finding your why. Would you say that, gentlemen, would you say that there needs to be a struggle to be able to find your why? Is there has to be some sort of difficulty? Is that a portion of being able to find your why? I mean, everybody goes through something, as I think we would all agree. How much does that affect what your why is? Because we've been talking about this a lot. Thoughts?
Thinking.
Yes.
Yeah. Because when I think, so I have this question written down, and I think it ties into that. It's a sub question, if you will.
Redirect.
You're stealing my question.
When choosing a hardship or having a hard situation happen to you, what is the difference in how it influences you? And I think that's why I'm trying to understand it. Hardships happen, and hardships have definitely influenced me. And I can think of hardships that haven't happened to me that have influenced me. But when I think of the things that have truly been significant in the way that I'm conscious of, in the way that I think, the way that I interpret life happening to me and around me, it's been from a hardship, and most of them are hardships that I didn't choose to enter into. I chose to be an RA, but I didn't choose to deal with the kids coming back having severe medical situations from over-consuming alcohol. I didn't choose to deal with the kids smoking weed in the stairwell, you know, like those things. But the way that those situations unfolded and the way that I handled them and the way that my mentors and the influencers in my life interacted with me during those moments are what shaped me way more significantly than any non-hardship experience I can think of.
Do you think the fight or just our natural fight or flight response plays into any of that? Because there's an element of danger to that, and it heightens our awareness of the situation, making it more influential on our paths. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, theory would suggest that, I mean, we kind of haven't brought this up, but it's just part of the automatic functioning that you learn from your parents. You know, like, okay, this amount of anxiety put in this kind of spin that I've learned from my parents is going to make me react in this certain type of way. And so that's part of that for sure, I would say, because you learn so much just growing up right from day one, you know, from your parents of how they're going to deal. That's why I talked about your dad. You know, he helped you, guided you in that certain way. And I know that my father has done that too. He's a fighter, and he always kind of instilled that into me. Like, no, you're not going to. So like my mom and dad kind of instilled that into me. So I'm like, no challenge is too big. If you tell me that I can't do something, how dare you? I will show you. You know what I mean? So like we all have these different types of things. I think that definitely plays a part into it. But now that only goes so far in certain situations, like you said, though. It's definitely situational because as great as our parents are, they're not everything. It just can't be.
They've had hardships too.
Yeah. So while you were growing up, they've had the same hardships. And so, so there's all different faults in there. So maybe that's the reason why everybody has these different struggles. And so I think it's important too. I have very similar, I grew up with a sister with disability. And so like, I hear a lot of what you're saying. And I know that certain people listening to this also have different hardships, and I think society would say these are bigger ones other than other ones, which is a load of crap, because everybody has their own that's very individually based. That's harder for them. And so that plays a big part of finding your why, I believe. But I feel like there's almost a retrospective, which we talked about a little bit, of looking back at it at some points in some places. And that could take longer for some people, and it could be a shorter time for other people. I mean, for me, things that happened when I was very young, like I said, like I was like 5, right? I didn't start uncovering what the heck any of that meant for 25 years, you know, like, and maybe it's just situational. I don't know. Thoughts?
It's a lot to unpack, and you know, what to pay attention to and what helps shape us into what we believe. And I know for Sean and I, who are have spouses, I think that there's a role that they can play as well. So Brittany with Sean and my wife Jennifer, you know, you start to blend families together. And so what I bring from my family and what Sean and his situation brings to his family, and then what spouses bring into the relationship too, I think can start to, and I think even for me, that's helped to shape me of who I am. So whether it's friends, whether it's our own family, or whether it's the merging of two families, I think certainly those influences all can play a part. How much each plays a part, it's really hard to say, but certainly I think that there's influence there.
So if we were going to give people some things to walk away here from this podcast and think, okay, these are, if I want to start thinking about my why, like, I don't think we'd be like, you know, go into some disaster, you know, make something happen to yourself. But I mean, it's
chase tornadoes. Yeah. Storm Chasers. Was that a movie way back when?
It was a show, I believe, called Storm Chasers.
Storm Chasers.
Or you could chase some waterfalls. Either one.
Yeah.
Heard that.
Yeah,
wait,
they're the same.
I don't think you're supposed to. I don't remember.
You're not supposed to go?
Don't go chasing waterfalls.
Don't
do it.
Okay.
Just stick to your rivers and lakes.
New guiding principle. Don't chase waterfalls.
So, but anyways, if we were going to have a few things that you could take away and say, okay, if I was going to start working on my why, what could I start doing? What would you say? Is there anything that we could like help somebody along those paths? Anybody?
I mean, just from what we're saying, we talk often about taking a step back, gain some perspective, right? Mm-hmm. So walk down that street that you've walked down a billion times before, but look for something new. And I mean that in a metaphorical sense, like reflect on your life and your experiences. And while you may not have found that climactic moment that's going to say like, oh my goodness, like this is the change that I'm going to make, at the very least you can say, these are the things that have shaped me. This is what I'm trying to do with my life, who I'm trying to be as far as I know now, so that when you go into a situation, you're not reacting, you're responding. You're saying, well, this is how my dad did it, and this is how I'm going to choose to do it, or how I'm not going to choose to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think of Sean's story that he shared earlier, that he had a vision for his family, for his son, and the reality was different, and he took that difference and has made it into a wonderful thing. And so having a belief, but also being open to circumstances changing, and then taking a step back and say, what am I being taught here? What is the purpose of this? And how can I use it for not only the benefit of my family, but in Sean's case too, it's really benefited so many other people as well.
What do you think?
I would say be introspective and really understand what gets you out of bed in the morning. What are you most passionate about? And look at those things, and then look at your experiences and try to figure out how experiences and passions tie together. So mine was marketing, like you said. That's something that I went to school for before I had a son with Down syndrome, but I used my marketing talent in a way to help advance advocacy for my son. And so sometimes these things build on each other. So just look at those building blocks that you already have and start to take action with those blocks, and then just see what happens, because new things will pop up as you take action. So just move forward.
Yeah, you definitely have something to offer. And so keep going down that road. I mean, you guys know I started walking down a road of trying to figure out what I was going to do with my life, like not too long ago. And I was guided back down the path of, if you've been in education, maybe you should stay in education, because that's, I don't know, your background and that's everything you know. So, and I was trying to go away from that, but finding that lane is really helpful. A couple other things that I was thinking about is being curious. And in every story, I would say, that we talked about, like hardships, there's always people involved. And so engaging other people, if you really want to know what's going on with your life and trying to find your why, start engaging other people that are not like you. And then you find out really quickly what you do believe in. And I would say, a little bit of a ripoff here from Arrested Development. We'll say no clutching. So like, open your hand a little bit and be open. I think we already said that, to what's going to happen next, instead of just being so tight-fisted on everything that you believe in. Because what happens if your why is not really your why, and it actually could be something else? Oh no! Because being open to saying my why might change. I have no idea, and so that's kind of a difficult thing. So,
yeah, I would say focus on character versus circumstance. So when you think about, we talk about part of Bowen Family Systems theory is working on becoming a self-differentiated person, which is working on self and managing self and developing what you believe. And it's almost not circumstance specific. You mentioned earlier about your father in the military, and you said the military is not for me, but what principles were pulled out of the military that I can use in other types of circumstance? So I'd say focus on the character piece versus where that circumstance, where it's actually played out.
Yeah. Well, unless anybody else has anything else to say about this topic.
All I have to say is that talking about expectations and like we talk all the time about how it's nice to make your expectations clear, but it's just like that catch-22. I was just caught by that. Like, you have these expectations, and it's great to have expectations and to be clear with them, but at the same time, it's like building with a house of cards. Anything can pull that away, and you got to be prepared for that, because that's just what life does.
All right. Anything else, Sean?
No, thanks for having me on. This has been great. It went as fast as you said it would.
Great. So a couple things as we close out here. You can check us out on Facebook, on Simplecast, Google Play,
The YouTubes.
iTunes.
The YouTubes.
You can email us at
theofpodcast@gmail.com.
Yes, he did it correctly.
Wow. What a guy.
And you should check out Jesse Huffstetler, or better known as
Jetler, the creator of our beloved theme song, and version 2.0 will be rolling out shortly. So be on the lookout for that. Those sick beats just got an upgrade.
and with that, I believe, wait a second, yes.
Just real quick, if our listeners wanted to get in touch with Sean Christie for what he does, Sean, how do they get a hold of you?
I'm on all those social medias, like the YouTubes and the Facebooks, but my website is probably the best bet, SeanChristy.com, SeanChristy.com.
There we go. So one thing that I was bereft, and I strongly apologize, John, that did not mention this. This is actually the 38th episode. And so whose episode is this?
Let's go with, in honor of the Browns' victory, TJ Carey, number 38, Cleveland
yeah.
Browns.
Yeah. All right. You played pretty well. Anyways, and with that, I am Alex.
I'm John.
And I'm Zach.
And I'm Sean.
And we will catch you next time.
Thanks for listening.
See you around.